think we all love getting a new bike, and if you're anything like me, you probably want to keep that bike looking like new for as long as possible. So here are a few costly mistakes when you get a new bike and how to avoid them. I guess step one is trying to protect your bike from any knocks and scratches it's going to take. You might find even just from the first ride, your cranks can get a little bit scuffed up. And then when you start falling off your bike, which inevitably happens, then you can get scratched up. So first line of protection, I think, is to get some sort of kit to go on your bike. There's loads of different options now. Actually, bikes come really well prepared nowadays. You can see on my all bare. Under there, I've got a nice big rubber pad. On the chainstay, it's got that stuff as well. Even on the cranks, that's got a bit of clear protection. But you can buy kits. Now you've got, like I say, a few different options. Markov do this one, it's a clear matte finish. Crank protectors, fork protectors, chain and seat stays, and actually that's frames. This gives you pretty much all of it in one kit. So it's always a really good idea to do this when your bike's brand new, even if you have to delay that first ride a little bit. I think you kind of regret it. If you don't do it first time, then it's gonna start picking up little scratches. It's gonna get dirty, so I would definitely recommend trying to do it before you even ride the bike. Learn to ride your new bike. Maybe you've just changed the style of bike you've got, gone to a longer travel, gone to full suspension from a hardtail or vice versa. Take your time to get a feel for the changes, and it might also take a bit longer to get set up. It's definitely worth spending a bit of time setting up your bike, especially if you've got a full suspension bike, trying to get the right sag. Although sort of having your suspension too soft isn't necessarily going to damage it. What you will find, or what I've definitely found, is if you've got too much sag, your bike's going to run too low, and then you're probably going to end up smashing your cranks and pedals into the ground, and you can end up damaging the bottom of those quite badly. It depends on what sort of terrain you're riding, but I've whacked them on rocks before, and you get really big gouges taken out of them. So that often happens because I've thought I've set the bike up right, and then I've got on it and I'm wearing heavier kit, or I've taken a backpack and it's actually ended up, too soft. So quite often on my first ride out, after I've set the bike up in the workshop, I'll take a shock pump with me. Obviously, looking after your bike is a bit of an ongoing process, and part of that is making sure that it's nice and clean. I would say it's a bit of a mistake to try and wipe off dry dirt off your bike, because that can give you tiny little scratches on the bike that eventually will make your bike look really scruffy. It depends on your paint job on the bike as well. Sometimes you have a really good sort of robust paint job that can take it, but you can see all this dry dirt. Actually, that comes off pretty easily, so I'll be all right. But you know what I mean? If it's a bit stuck on, I'll make sure that I wet the bike down and give it a proper wash rather than just rub it. And try and get a proper bike brush. They're super soft. See all the stuff coming out of that. So again, once it's wet, there's no risk of that scratching your lovely paint work. And use some proper bike cleaner as well. Then you can get yourself a lovely soft fleece for drying the bike off. Not forgetting to lube everything, like I've said already with chain, but even stuff like this silicone spray or kind of finishing product on your bike makes it look really nice, makes it look like new, but also it kind of makes it harder for the stuff to stick onto it. So if you go out and ride again in the wet or in the mud, it's harder to get, that stuff that really sticks on there. It can make it really difficult to clean. So definitely worth doing a bit of that after you've washed it. All right, so you might have set your bike up at home, but when you go for your first ride, I would say definitely check your tyre pressures. If you've set up new tubeless tyres, they almost always go down a bit overnight, but tyres just do go down a little bit just over time. So I will always check them. I guess the easiest way is to give them a squeeze, but actually, the best way is a digital tyre pressure gauge, because even a couple of PSI can make a big difference. And if they're too low, you risk damaging your rims or even ripping your tyres. A really important job to do after the first ride is to check your torques. So go through your bolts, go around the bike, really check that everything's tight. And I would say do that for probably the first 2-3 rides as well, because you often find there's just one bolt that will come loose in a bike, full suspension bikes particularly. There might be a pivot bolt that just from factory should have had Loctite on there, or thread lock, should I say, and it will come loose. And if they come out completely, it can really damage your bike. I've seen it a lot with rear axles as well. I wouldn't want to thread lock a rear axle, but some different bikes will just kind of, until the bike beds in a bit, the rear axle might come loose. But that's one I do check before every ride. But like I say, go around the bike. You do this with a torque wrench. You can get some of these really simple ones where you've got just like a bit that will go on your little ratchet. Or you can get the big workshop ones. I would say with a bit of experience, you don't necessarily need torque wrenches. You'll kind of get a feel for how tight things need to be. And if you're new to mountain bikes, often people go too tight and they'll sort of strip the threads. So you don't have to go mad. If you look on sort of most of your parts, like on the stems next to the bolts, it'll give you like a 5 Newton meters or something like that. So that's not very tight. So don't go crazy. But if you want to be accurate, get yourself a torque wrench and have a look next to the bolts. It often tells you how tight they need to be. Same thing goes for spokes. If you've got hand-built wheels, especially with aluminium rims, you might find on the first ride they kind of ting and pink, make these funny noises when you ride as the sort of spokes bed in. So after the first ride I would check them. The easiest way is just go around like that, checking both sides, just squeezing the spokes together. They shouldn't really move more than a couple of millimeters. If any of them are loose or looser than the rest, then it's time to look at the tensions with a spoke key. If you're inexperienced with one of these, I would go steady because you can ruin a wheel if you're tweaking the wrong spokes or spoke key. So if you're worried, take it to a shop for them to check out. If you know what you're doing, go around and either true the rim up or give it a slight bit more tension on the spokes. Once you've cleaned your bike and it's time to lube it up, be really careful not to spray any lube onto your brakes. It's a really common problem, especially with a rear brake, if you're lubing up your chain. To get overspray and it can ruin your pads. So sometimes you can boil it out with a blowtorch, but obviously it's not really recommended. You don't want to be having to do that every time you lube your bike. You can cover your brakes over with these covers, or simply just try and be a bit more careful. And if you're using spray, try and spray it down, so onto the top of the chain as you're spinning the cranks backwards. So any overspray goes down onto the wheel there, and I'll still wipe that up. The other problem is maybe if you're trying to put on some nice finishing stuff like silicone spray onto your frame to make your bike look nice, then what I'll do is I'll use a sort of rag behind. So I'm spraying stuff on, or going really steady, or even spraying it onto the rag and then rubbing it on, but just making sure there's something behind so I don't get any of that lubricant stuff or silicone spray onto my brakes. For lubing my chain, I'd much rather use proper chain lube that isn't an aerosol. So again, I sort of drop it into the top of the chain from right down by the bottom of the mech, get a nice neat covering all the way over, and there's no risk of that going anywhere. Because it's also really important to have a clean and lube chain. It's crazy how quick your chain will wear out, or your whole drivetrain will. If you leave it dirty and muddy, and you can see those cassettes get really black, it's kind of like grinding paste, and you'll wear through that drivetrain really quickly. So particularly in winter, if you're using wet lube, it's much stickier, so it doesn't get washed off. But I will then make sure that I'm really often cleaning that chain using proper chain cleaner. So I'm not just leaving it to go black, because you'll often find after the end of the ride it will be quite black, and that's what I mean about that sort of grinding paste. I don't want any of that stuff on there. I want my chain to look nice and shiny and silver every time I ride. Here's a nice simple little tip I think for keeping your bike looking good. Yeah, you can have all those lovely protection kits all over your bike, but if you've got a black fork particularly, just get some electrical tape. It doesn't cost you anything, it's so cheap, super neat as well. Then you can wrap it around. If you're using one of these mud guards like I've got here, little ones that you can make yourself if you want, or we do sell these GMBN ones if you want a GMBN merch version, then get some electrical tape and just wrap it around your fork leg where the zip tie is going to go. Obviously, like I said, if you've got a black fork, then it matches it perfectly. Because what you'll find when you're riding in the mud, those zip ties will rub on your fork a little bit. If you ever sort of, you know, shuffle that mud guard around, it might do if you're putting it in and out of the car, then it will scratch your fork leg. It doesn't take long at all, but if you've got a bit of electrical tape there, it's going to keep it looking nice and new. A really common way that bikes get smashed is actually not riding them, transporting the things. So I did a video the other week about what to keep in your car if you're driving around with your bikes. I'm a big fan of these sort of removals blankets, whatever you want to call them. So super cheap, quite thick blankets that you can stick between bikes. Obviously I've got a van, but quite often I'm strapping bikes against each other. And when they're moving, you'll find the fork and the back of the bike get really badly scratched. So I'll use that, or you can get these proper bike protectors. This is a nuke-proof one that kind of go right over the bike. This is the best. It's really thick. Bike's so well protected. But yeah, especially if you're taking your bike apart and sticking it in the back of a car and piling another bike on top, then get some old blankets. Make sure they don't scratch each other to death. There you go, there's a few tips for helping you keep your bike looking spangly and new. And I definitely, this is my pride and joy, this is my All Bear Rockham. It's got my name on it. I did this one as a Mayo. I chose the colours, it's a matte one, so I actually haven't put any of that clear protection on it because it's kind of matte carbon. I think you'd see them a bit more obviously, and actually I love the colour of it and be able to see that raw carbon. But I have taken really good care of it, so kept it nice in the back of the van, make sure I've washed it properly and sprayed it down afterwards. So yeah, kept it looking really good. Hopefully it's gonna stay like that forever. Give us a thumbs up if you like this video. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us your tips as well down below in the comments.